the deepest.
Jim Harts' love for his wife is everlasting, forever immortalized in his poems. This year on September 11th, as the world mourns, Jim's words are getting him through his grief. I'm Christine Persichetti. In the 22 years since September 11th, 2001, thousands of people, first responders and civilians alike, have died of 9/11 related illnesses. Their loved ones constantly reminded of that tragic day. One Brooklyn man has poured his love for his late wife onto the page in books of poetry dedicated to her. Currents News' Jessica Easthope sat down with Jim Hart and has his story from Borough Park.
The books that fill the shelves of Jim Hart's Borough Park home library have defined his life.
The first time she loved me, I stood in the deepness of her eyes.
But these words define his love. They're his own, and they're dedicated to his wife, Sue.
And I knew right then I had found that once in a lifetime love perfection. She was the love of my life. It's hard to this day. You know, some days it seems like 3 minutes ago, and some days it seems like 3 lifetimes ago.
Loving Sue and Missing Sue are two of Jim's books of poetry.
In your living room with no lights except for the TV.
Sue was and still remains his creative muse. Sue was told she had terminal gallbladder cancer just 3 months before she passed away in 2020. Doctors said it was 9/11 related, a diagnosis that brought Jim back to that day 22 years ago, when Sue was in charge of facilities at City Hall.
Being a husband, I said, go home. And she said, a manager of facilities are in danger here. I can't leave now.
Jim saw with his own eyes what was waiting at Ground Zero. He volunteered there after work as a chief of department for New York City Sanitation, hoping to find survivors.
Everything, and I mean everything, the streets, the signs, the buildings, were this kind of tannish color. You could not tell where you were.
He wished his wife, who was a dedicated partner, mother, and employee, hadn't been so dedicated in that moment.
Not only she stayed the first day, I knew Sue, and I knew she was going to go back. It was, you wish she had listened to you and not got to work.
Since 9/11, 69 types of cancer have been linked to the toxic dust at Ground Zero. Sue's duty to her work and to the people of New York wasn't unappreciated.
Susan Hart has been one of City Hall's true heroes.
But as of March of 2023, she and nearly 6,000 others have paid the ultimate price for it. Now, Jim is left with 50 years of memories and 2 works of poetry that have been published in journals all over the world.
I never expected to be the one who lived on.
His love for Sue memorialized forever.
There are a lot of tear-stained pages. There were no blank pages. The ideas flowed as fast as I fell in love with them.
If he could, Jim would rewrite history. But instead, he writes about Sue.
Never knew how Adam mourned his missing rib.
In Borough Park, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
You can get Jim's books, Loving Sue and Missing Sue, on Amazon. The Diocese of Brooklyn held its 9/11 remembrance across the Brooklyn Bridge. Members of the FDNY marching from the World Trade Center to the Co-Cathedral of St. Joseph. Firefighters from Battalion 57 took part in the annual march. They carried 23 flags to represent the 23 fallen heroes from their battalion who passed that day. The marchers say the walk across the bridge and back to Brooklyn is symbolic of bringing home the brave men, and it continues their promise to never forget.
Let's always remember, our history and our brothers before us that gave the ultimate sacrifice to their life. And always honor them and respect them.
After the march, the firefighters gathered for Mass. There, they read the names of those fallen heroes. There were remembrances of the brave heroes from 9/11 across the country, and one of them included a 300-mile moving memorial. Former flight attendant Paulie Veneto arrived in Shanksville, Pennsylvania today. He left Newark Airport last month and has been traveling with only a beverage cart along the route of United Flight 93, a San Francisco-bound plane that was hijacked by terrorists on 9/11. The crew and passengers on board decided to crash the aircraft instead of letting it hit its target, the nation's capital. For the past 2 years, Paulie has pushed his cart along other flight routes from that day, all to remember his flight crew colleagues. To read even more 9/11 coverage, including stories from that day and its aftermath, go to thetablet.org. The Diocese of Brooklyn prayed for equality during a feast day mass on Sunday. The liturgy at the Co-Cathedral of St. Joseph was in honor of St. Peter Claver, the patron saint of slaves. The yearly diocesan mass was started years ago as a way of promoting racial unity while social justice protests were happening around the country. Now the liturgy looks to highlight the ongoing issues for African Americans. This year, in the wake of the Supreme Court's end of affirmative action, Catholics prayed for racial equality in education. Brooklyn Bishop Robert Brennan, who celebrated Mass, spoke about how important equality is to people of faith.
We do that by being faithful to the truth, by promoting the dignity of every human person, created in God's image and likeness. We look into the eyes of every person and see the image and likeness of God.
Equity in education is very important. In Catholic schools, everybody's the same. We bring them in, and it doesn't matter where their relatives came from, where their ancestors came from, where they came from. The fact is they're with us now, and that's what matters.
Going to college, you're not just competing with people in your country, you're competing from people all over the world. And if we don't have equitable education, then there really is no equitable line between everybody.
According to the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, the Diocese of Brooklyn has the largest number of Black Catholics in the country, more than 200,000. That is this Currents News Update. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.